Hello and welcome back to the Sherry Sylvester Show. Here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, much of the work that we do, whether it's developing a framework to transform public schools, to figuring out how much it will cost to build the charging stations that would be needed if everyone had an electric car, to providing the firsthand reports on how Mexico's new president will impact the policies of that country and ours. Whatever we do makes its way into the news of Texas, America, and the world via the media. Texas research scholars, leaders, and staff get close to 1,000 media mentions every month. That often means that the reporters that are doing the analyzing of an issue care about including our perspective, and they must know how to find us. It means we must establish relationships with the media and people we can trust, even though as conservatives we're not always encouraged to do that. The Dallas Morning News' new public editor, Stephen Buckley, wrote last week that our world has become so divided that some conservatives may believe we no longer need the legacy media. But Buckley says they may not need us, but we need them. It's really great to be needed. And that's why I'm so glad to have my friend Karen Brooks Harper on the show today. Karen graduated from the University of Missouri at Columbia Journalism School and arrived in Texas in 1995 to join the Corpus Christi Caller-Times. She spent several years in Laredo and Mexico covering immigration. We definitely want to talk about that, and the drug war for Knight Ridder newspapers. She's covered Texas politics for more than 2 decades. She worked at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, which is where I think she was when I met her, where she is soon returning as a senior politics reporter at the Dallas Morning News. She put out a tweet saying she will focus on the most powerful political forces in Texas. Going to talk about that too. Karen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sherry, so much. It's great to be here.
So, how did you get to Texas? Why did you choose to come here? Did Corpus offer you a job? Did you want to come here?
Well, when I was looking for a job in my last semester at the University of Missouri, I was given a couple of options, but I was a December grad, so I actually had quite a bit of there was a smaller competition pool, so we had some good options. And my mother happened to have been born in Corpus Christi, Texas, but I had never been there. I also, at the time, wanted to be a cops reporter. So I was a big fan of Edna Buchanan from the Miami Herald. I wanted to do the police stories. And the Corpus Christi Caller-Times had a 2 to 11, 2 in the afternoon to 11 at night, which is perfect for a graduating college senior in my type, And so I was hired sight unseen and went down to Corpus Christi for that job for a couple of years. And really, I just kind of never... That turned into the gig at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, which eventually sent me to Austin, which turned into the Dallas Morning News, and so I just never made it out of Texas after that. I just stuck around.
But you're not a native. Are you a native of Missouri?
I am not. No, I was born in Georgia. My family moved to California when I was young, like my first year basically, which is kind of where my parents grew up in California. Came through Houston around 2nd grade, and then ended up in Greenville, Mississippi for 3rd grade, and that's where I graduated from. So where I'm native actually from is someplace I really haven't lived very much, which is Georgia.
Right.
But I spent 1 year in Texas when I was in 2nd grade, and that was my only claim. Now my mom has passed, but my dad lives here with his family and our family on that side. My husband is a native of Euless, Texas, and that's where all of his family is. My son is Austin native, so the roots have grown since I've gotten here. But we did have a thread through my mom, so.
Right. Well, you're a Texan. I mean,
I got here,
Yeah, as soon as you could.
As soon as I could. That's right.
So you wanted to be a cops reporter. You wanted to be a reporter. Why was that? Was it? I know you're a Nancy Drew fan.
Yes.
So were you a Lois Lane fan?
She always seemed a little neurotic to me, but I liked her tenacity. I mean, I was the editor. I was the editor of my 2nd grade newspaper, Tues News, in Houston, Katy, Texas, actually. And so I wrote editorials. I sent reporters out on assignments when I guess that would have made me, 7? 7 years old. So and I don't know if I just wanted to be the boss, or if I liked writing. I was a very early reader and writer. So early on, I really liked the idea of it as a way to tell stories.
Uh-huh.
I guess it spoke to me in that way. And then I never really dropped the idea. And the more it became clear to me what journalism was and what it was about, it it dawned on me that this was the way I wanted to spend my life, looking for the truth, cutting through the filters, trying to go to the source, be in the middle of the action, hold, speak truth to power, hold public, the public accountable, public officials accountable.
Right.
Police, when I was getting into the cops reporting, it was more about, holding the police accountable, or, explaining to the residents kind of what their community was turning into, and how it was treating its weakest and its, I mean, there's a whole facet of cops reporting, excuse me, that actually translates to the political reporting. We can get into that at some point, but journalism was always a thing with me. It just never really, and I wanted to be a rock star for a while, and I wanted to, I think everybody wants to be a veterinarian at some point,
Right, yeah.
and a marine biologist, that kind of stuff. But I always came back to journalism. Yeah, and I think that it is, for all of its flaws and for all of its uncertainty and, you know, tendency to morph every few years into something new, and it's still to me the one of the most noble professions, and there's that's why I said one of them. We look at a lot of areas that are critical, but I think that communication and truth telling and government accountability is among the most critical, and whatever I can do to be a part of that,
Mhm.
has always spoken to me.
What did you see down on the border when you were in Laredo? And since there's so much focus down there now, and so what do you see with your eyes when you look at it now? We do a lot of work here. We have an initiative in Mexico and
Hmm.
monitoring the elections and monitoring what's going on.
Yeah.
So,
Well, when I went down to Laredo, I was working for the Star Telegram, and we were owned at the time by Knight Ritter. Um, I think they since somebody else, Knight
mhm,
McClatchy or somebody maybe. I can't keep up. But at the time I was there, it was in 2001. It was right after Fox was elected in
mhm,
Mexico in 2001.
right.
It was right after the September 11th attacks. I was actually in Mexico learning the language again. When that happened, and then I moved to Laredo right after that. So I got there at a time the first 3 years of Fox's presidency, and Bush had been elected the year before. So it was a very interesting time in the U.S. Mexico relations because they were trying to like be buddies, if you
Right,
remember, right? So
right. Bush and Fox were friends.
yeah, and I think NAFTA was really new, had been at the time, or was what was the time frame of that? That was Clinton program, right? So it wouldn't have been,
Not,
yeah, it would have been a few years after that.
yeah, yeah, I remember,
Yeah,
yeah,
because one of the stories I did was I went down to a city down south of, or down near Oaxaca, Paracho, a guitar
uh-huh,
town, and NAFTA had like revived it because of the guitars they were making. So
uh-huh,
it was in the shadow of that. But anyway, so I went down there to cover, and at the time, immigration was an issue, as it always is, but it was mostly like cartels, um, cartel violence, U.S. Mexico relations, over things like the water situation in Texas, where they were,
mhm,
they were fighting with Texas over the water issues.
right, yeah,
Um, there weren't just hordes of people coming over the border at that time,
mhm,
especially, as compared to now, particularly. But and whatever there was coming, there whatever numbers there we had coming over, it was they were kind of handling it with the border patrol, and it was a story. It just wasn't the same story. It was
right,
meanwhile the cartels were, the Zeta cartel was coming up into, was actually just starting, so they were shooting up City Hall or hospitals, having big gunfights in the middle of Nuevo Laredo, and
uh-huh,
so a lot of my attention was taken by the violence in there. It's shifted. It's a shifting story now.
mhm,
But one of the things that I noticed all there consistently is that the residents had, a very, love-hate relationship with that, with that flow of immigration back and forth.
Right.
They benefited from it in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways it detracted from their quality of life. So
Hmm.
that doesn't seem to have changed. I mean, that's a dynamic that's still there.
Hmm. Yeah.
If that answers your questions.
Kinda. Kinda. So, what do you think about? I mean, it seems like they seem pretty overrun now. I mean, if you're in Eagle Pass,
Yeah, I
you're
haven't been there, so I think the numbers are supposed to be down, but yeah, I haven't.
they're down
But yeah,
now
yeah,
because
but sure, sure. We've seen that.
because
We've all seen the
Abbott
numbers.
shut
Yeah.
a lot of it off. But well, let me just ask you. I wasn't going to ask you this. So, what do you think about Abbott's strategy of moving the migrants into the northern cities, into Chicago and New York and Washington?
Well, I mean, I can't, without actually giving an opinion on whether I think it's a good idea or a bad idea, I can, with absolute objectivity, say it seems to have been effective in a lot of ways. I
Mhm.
mean, I think what his goal was, was in part to move them out, and secondly, to draw attention and some bit of empathy from the other states that are too far north to feel this. It's when they trickle up there, it's less of an impact than when they roll in like a tidal wave, right? So,
Mhm.
and I think that if he wanted to do that, he did it. So. Um, our perception of his goals, being what is as much as he's been saying to us, which is to fight the numbers on the border, get them out of the communities that are being hardest hit, draw some attention to the and accountability to the people up north who were criticizing his tactics. I think he did. I think it worked for him.
Yeah,
Was it the best way to do all that? I'm not the person to ask for that.
yeah. It seemed I live in San Antonio,
Mm,
which is it's a Hispanic city. It's been majority minority city for 300 years,
mhm.
so it's there's not a lot of xenophobia there, but there is a lot of feeling I think among most people there about just how much volume you can handle. How
Yeah,
much the hospitals can handle, how much the
yeah,
schools can handle, and it seemed like and you say you're going to cover the most powerful political forces in Texas. It seems to me that one of the things that Abbott did with that action, aside from the merit of the policy, is he really put himself on the map.
yeah, yeah. He did.
I mean, people know who's running for president, and everybody knows who Governor Abbott is
Yeah,
in the country.
yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, and and whether that was one of his goals or not, making a name for himself, that's
Hmm.
not something we'd get out of him, even if it
Oh
was one of
no,
his
yeah,
goals,
we didn't
right?
ask
So,
him that.
so speculation being what it is, but people, there's only segments of the society that are paying attention to things like, what Texas does on school choice and what Texas does on abortion rights and
Uh-huh.
what they do on, but when you start busing people to people's hometown and that starts making the newspapers that land on their front yards or that used to, I don't know. That's I might be dating myself on that
Right?
one.
Yeah, I don't
On
think
their
they're on.
phones,
Yeah.
um, then they pay attention and they want to know who's responsible for this. And Governor Abbott is the name they get, right? Because
Uh-huh.
it was his policy. Whereas, I mean, he makes policy. He sets agendas on things like school choice and then that reaches into a particular segment of the population. But the universality of that story, plus the sheer optics of it, just really grabbed everybody. So,
I think that's right.
I think you're right. I mean, I think people were getting to know him more and more as he became more of a political force. And Texas has always been,
Hmm.
kind of a people tend to know our governors.
Right.
But yeah, that if there was a tipping point, that was it. I would say,
Mm.
yeah, um, yeah,
Well,
good point.
talking about when
Remind
you
me to call you after I start the new job at the. I'm still at the Texas Tribune for a few more weeks. I might call you
that's
before
good.
that.
That's good. Well, like I said, we've got a lot. I think TPPF has in terms of our policy between Texas and Mexico, TPPF is certainly involved on a lot of levels there.
Oh yeah. Well, I've been talking to you guys about it for a long time too. I was calling you
Yeah,
back in the day about it.
absolutely. Well, but going back to where you were when you started, so were you working as a reporter in Texas when Bush was governor? Were you one of the reporters who felt like you knew him?
Yes. I started my job in Corpus Christi in 1995, January
Uh-huh.
1995. Bush was governor. He'd just been elected governor, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
90,
because it
yeah.
was Ann Richards, and we were
Right. Yeah.
watching it from the Mizzou because we were all journalists at Mizzou, and
Uh-huh.
so we were all watching it, and we had bets going and all that stuff. Pardon me. So yeah, so Bush was just elected when I got to Texas, and I didn't really have a lot of contact with Austin until a few years later. But in 1995, the big issue of the day was juvenile crime. And so, for example, in Corpus Christi, I was the police reporter in Corpus Christi. The year before I got there, there was like 45 drive-by shootings, and the year I was there were 460. It was an enormous explosion. Not to mention,
Uh-huh.
one of the zip codes in Corpus Christi was identified as one of the top 10 zip codes in the state for juvenile crime. Like, it had the most.
Uh-huh.
So Governor Bush was, yeah, it would have had to have been that year because I wasn't at Corpus Christi for more than 2 years. So he was in town kind of shopping his juvenile justice reform package, which was huge. And it was around the same time he was doing the concealed handgun licenses, the program in the state also, because I was also working at Collar Times for that, I think. But so he came to Corpus to talk about the 78411 zip codes. I still remember.
Uh-huh.
And and what his policies were going to do for that. And I sat in the front row and I asked him a question. I don't remember what it was, and he's like, "Good question," and he answers it, and introduced myself and all that stuff, right? And that was it. So a couple years later, I come to Austin, and he sees me at a press conference. And he's like, "Karen, when did you make it out of the Collar Times? Welcome to Austin." And we all talked about how Bush was good with that. Um, he never seemed to forget a face. He never forgot details. I chalked it up to Karen Hughes and her brilliance.
Right.
A lot of us, I'm sure, did, but he also had an knack for that. So anyway, that's kind of a side story. But yeah, I was here, and so by the time I got to Austin, he was well into. He was not yet that well into his campaign for presidency. He
Uh-huh.
was already exploring it, and then I was there for the last session, 2000, and I guess it would have been the '99 session.
Right. Yeah.
When he was being followed around on the governor's mansion front lawn by all the nationals during the end of session barbecue, and they was waiting for him to announce.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, I was there for the whole time. It was
I
the short answer to that question.
Well, I came in around that time. I came into Texas in '99, and I
Mm-hmm.
was one of those nationals because I
Ah,
was a political reporter at the Trentonian, and so as I was making the transition, I was trying to cover him, and I went and actually knocked on the door of the governor's mansion because there were a bunch of New Jersey guys there. I knew they were in there,
mm-hmm.
and of course they were going to give him money. They were going to donate, and because that's where you go when you need money, is up into the wealth belt. And Karl Rove answered the door.
Yeah.
And he was just great. But it's the same kind
Oh
of thing.
yeah.
He said, yeah, I said, like talk to him. And he was just, well, just not going to happen really, but.
Maybe he'll get lucky and he'll sit next to you at the barbecue.
But I remember after that, it was kind of the difference. And I wanted to talk to you about, the newspaper doesn't arrive on the lawn. I remember in one of the first debates, they asked Bush what he read. They used to ask you a lot what you read, and he said, he read the Bible, but he said, "I read the Austin American Statement,"
Oh yeah.
and
Yes.
which he thought was like a great answer, and of course, it's not a particularly good answer. So I'm looking at this stuff, and I'm looking at, you're hanging around Gen Z. 4% of them get their news from even digital news sources, 7% from millennials. And
Where do the rest of them get it from?
social
Media.
So
But from
50%.
people or from links on social media? Like, this is tell me more about this. 'Cause
Well,
I've heard these stuff, but I'm curious to know.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
assuming that they're going through TikTok.
Yeah.
Or they're getting stuff off Twitter. I mean, when I go for news, I usually go to Twitter first, but you're getting links off Twitter.
Right. Right. So are they getting it from the people themselves? Like, are most Gen Zers like following Greg Abbott's Twitter feed? Or are they just looking at influencers who are reading the news for them, maybe?
I think they're looking at influencers.
That's got to be it. Yeah.
I think they're looking at influencers.
Yeah.
So how do you? I mean, you're not. You're a pretty good tweeter, but you're not tweeting all day, clearly.
Yeah.
So how do you take your truth, how do you get your stuff out, take your truth finding and have an impact on the narrative?
That's a question, a perennial question for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because and I can, and I can speak to my, with my experience at the Tribune, but I can also speak generally with the experience of just about every journalist I talk to about this. And that is, you hear statistics like that, and they're believable. I'm not, I assume that those are, for our
I
purposes,
got them
that's
off the
yeah,
internet.
right.
I got them
Got them
right
off the
off the
internet, you're
internet.
right, right. But you know, the majority of our readership does not come from links from social media. So I don't think they're clicking on the links from,
Uh-huh.
it's a very, and I'm not talking about specifically the Tribune, I'm talking about generally, Facebook is almost, just people don't even, that's much
Right. Yeah.
less of a source. So, and we were doing this, at the Dallas Morning News even, so we were able to kind of track and see where the links come and everything.
Right.
And the socials are not where the numbers are coming from.
Right.
Apple News, sorry, yeah, well, yeah, Apple News,
Uh-huh.
Yahoo News, things like that. When
So
it
the
hits those,
aggregators. Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes Reddit, you
Uh-huh.
know, um, that's where we get big reach, and we also get big reach from people coming to our website specifically to look for us,
Uh-huh.
which was true. I can't tell you what those metrics are at the Tribune. I have to be honest. We had a staff meeting last week, and it was right after we'd announced my retirement transition, like,
Uh-huh.
and wish that I'd paid closer attention. I was a little distracted,
Right.
but it's true of everywhere that we're experiencing interesting, trends where it all seems to be the news coming from social media as being a major source for the people who are supposed to be the audience of our future, right? We
Uh-huh.
need to get the people coming, um, but still the a large chunk of traffic to these to websites like mine and like the Morning News and like the Star Telegram and places like that, without being able to talk specifically about their numbers, I can tell you that there's a lot of direct traffic.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the socials are hit or miss on driving traffic to
Right.
us.
Yeah.
Um, so you
And
get
so
your
email too. I mean, you've got your email newsletters
email
coming.
newsletters that's it's a pretty good source, and we do a lot of live journalism that draws people in. But I think what a lot of that is about is developing relationships with people who then seek you out. Come to texastribune.org. And
Uh-huh.
thankfully, I'm not the one they pay to make those decisions and
Uh-huh.
those strategies. But our direction and the direction of, I mean, not our direction specifically at the Tribune. I have to be careful that I'm not speaking for
Right.
the.
Sure.
Um, but the direction seems to be nationally seems to be a trend towards local media, and I think the reason for that is that it's we have not been able to like capture the interests of that younger generation in the form we've been doing it so far.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's a lot of emphasis on local right now. Local news is very sexy, to get into that, just to put
Uh-huh.
resources there, which is you know kind of a pendulum shift because we've been seeing the death of the local news sources, as you
Right.
and I
Yeah.
talked about. Um, yeah, so I think the answer to how do we get like broaden the reach and get those readers, get those other, I think by extension they're getting our journalism, you know, but are they getting it in a way that we can that's sustainable for us?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I I don't just that's the challenge. If you're hearing it from an influencer on TikTok,
Right.
who's benefiting from that? Probably, maybe us, that maybe the TikToker.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I
And
wish I had a better answer.
and who are they? That's it's
Somebody's got a smart idea for this. If you
right.
talk to
Yeah.
Sewell or Sonal, maybe they'll probably have a more articulate answer than me. But
Well, I'm
I haven't
going to
heard the
talk to them
answer.
soon.
Yeah, I haven't heard the answer to that in a way that I've been able to derive any kind of comfort from.
Yeah, one of the most discouraging things is I had uh, well at the Trib they did one of these things, the We Are Texans things, and they were
Really,
trying to
yeah,
figure out why young people don't vote
yeah,
and their voting numbers. And then this corroborated with a researcher that I talked to from Massachusetts, and they don't feel like they've got enough information.
They don't
So
feel like they've got enough information.
yeah,
Because it used to be they didn't feel like that mattered.
right. Now they feel like they don't have enough information.
Well,
So yeah, I know. I never felt about it. So you tweet out you're going to cover the most powerful political forces in Texas. So we talked about Abbott. I don't know if you would include him on that list, but who or what would you say? I mean, oil and gas is political force. I mean, so
sure. I mean, and it is a vague description of this
uh-huh.
new beat I'll be doing when I join the Dallas Morning News, right? And just to be clear, I'm here representing the Texas Tribune.
Right. Big
But when I do start that, we're envisioning it as kind of a holistic, approach to the covering of power in Texas, right? In the typical way, kind of the Austin bureaus or the teams are laid out is you've got a bureau chief covering the governor and the big stuff, and then you've
uh-huh.
got the house writer covering the speaker, and you've got the senate writer covering the lieutenant governor, and that's great, and they'll continue to do that in so far as they would run the chambers.
Uh-huh.
I'm not a bureau chief. I'm not going in as a bureau chief. We don't
Uh-huh.
have a bureau chief anymore. There will be there's a political editor there. So, but what I'm going to be doing is covering the governor, but also covering the others. You know, Phelan and Patrick and Paxton and all those guys, Miller, everybody,
Mhm.
in a more holistic manner, kind of how the decisions they make, how they make those decisions, and how they impact, and how they impact the lives of Texans. And so, who that is and how what that's gonna look like is TBD.
Mhm.
It's an approach that hasn't been taken at the morning news in that particular way, and so I'm gonna get a chance to build it, kind of
Uh-huh.
build an approach to it. The way I envision it is, first of all, I think that the levers of power, which I kind of think is a cool name for it, um, shifts when it comes to over time. They shift over the issues,
Mhm.
um, and half of what a journalist does in Austin is covers the people that have the power to impact lives. That's why we're here. The other half of what we do is cover the people whose lives are impacted by the people who make
Right,
those
yeah.
decisions. It's pretty much it's the two sides of the same coin, really.
Uh-huh.
Um, so we're talking about lobbyists,
Mhm.
who the prominent donors and lobbyists are, the Republican Party of Texas, certainly, you know, um, because they have become more, and they all kind of ebb and flow over the years, right? Kind of depending on how, but they are very engaged. Um, you know, I don't. I think that when you talk about what I think that what that means, and what you or somebody else may end up pointing out at some point, is that is a lot of Republicans that will be, in this, but that's because they're the ones holding most of the power,
Mhm.
And then in cases like, the Democratic chair issue, in the House, the House reporter will be covering that, but we may also, look at how much power those chairs actually have. How much power is being conceded to the minority party.
Uh-huh.
In what steps, and kind of, so it's a very it's going to be exciting to build it, but it's hard to describe it. Um, yeah.
Well, and how do you, uh, in telling that story, I mean, I feel like, and we do this, uh, you know, the 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 press follows the political narrative in Texas, and we know a lot about Beto and Trey Martinez Fisher and and all this coming up. And so you're watching this event as if something is happening, and Texans have uh, consistently chosen Republicans.
Hmm.
Abbott and Patrick put in office by over 1 million votes,
Hmm.
despite the fact that they had Beto ran against the governor last time. Patrick had what's his name, Collier. He's a real guy, a legitimate guy, and so, but there it always seems like this report is. Uh, these people seem to they're like a splinter group. I was thinking, uh, not you all, but I mean, we there's a lot of descriptions of this as a right wing group. Well, if there's
Oh, yeah,
These
okay.
initiatives
But
are right-wing.
yeah, especially recently, sure.
Yeah, these are right-wing initiatives. Well, if they win all the elections by over 1 million votes, then the center has moved.
I mean, mathematically, yeah, it would be hard to ignore that. Yeah.
It seemed like that. So in looking at what your public editor said that I talked about in the introduction of wanting to get all the voices in, how do you do that? Because I know a lot of people have stopped talking. I never have. I have always said, call that reporter up.
Yeah, no, yeah, and you're right, and you have, and that's something we've always appreciated about you, and it's why we're still talking today, is because we've
Right,
maintained
yeah.
contact over all this time, and we did have a relationship when in 1999 when we first got, and I
Right,
remember
yeah.
you were at this San Antonio Express News still.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, so many good times have passed since then. So so much has happened. And by the way, I forgot to include TPPF as one of those people that came up in our discussion about this,
Uh-huh.
because there are, political leaders and there are thought leaders. And, particularly if we were in an environment where the tables were turned and the Democrats were winning by 1 million votes statewide every year, then TPPF would not have us be, considered as much influence on the winner side. There's also powerful people on the minority side too,
That's true.
political minority side. So
And the
that's
thought
going to
minority,
be
too.
with the thought, yeah, in the thought minority, which might be a really good way to describe this dynamic that everybody keeps trying to think of. I don't know if that is it. All right, let me finish this thought.
Okay.
The right wing thing,
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be cyclical in the news media. There was a shift, very definitely a shift away from it. We were told, don't use it. Don't use it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about the Tribune, because that's not been the case with the Tribune. We use right wing at the Tribune.
Uh-huh.
But generally it was because, for that reason, I think at the time in like the early 2000s, I think I was in Laredo when it came out, when this discussion was happening, it was like the term right wing was used like just so many more times more than the term left wing was.
Mm-hmm.
And it had this, and at the time there didn't seem to be such a broad spectrum of ideas that you could put into the conservative, field, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then so on the left, if you were going to go like super extreme left, what was it, like John Birch Society or somebody? I don't know who would be on the. I mean, but you don't hear from them as much, and they're
Uh-huh.
not gaining, in favor either.
Well, unless you're watching the people that are marching at UT.
Well, fair enough. That's fair enough. And I'm the wrong person to start talking about that yet. I'm still covering health and human services, so my head's been in Medicaid procurement recently. But you're right, you're right. And there's a lot of
A lot of that.
flaws about what I just said. But generally
No,
speaking,
yeah.
it's kind of what you were talking about. The center's moved over to the right a little bit. I think that you can look at the totality of the spectrum and still find extremism. And what used to be extremism on both sides. And so what used to be extremism the definition has changed on that because of the movement of the right. I mean, of the center slightly to the right, if we're going to go with that premise. And that's something that I've heard, people who've acknowledged that too. So how you talk to both sides is that I go back to, getting everybody's voices in there. I go back to the notion that the people who are in power, the more powerful you are, the more you're going to pop up in the news media, the more you're going to be held accountable, the more people are going to think you're picking on them, because to your point, there's a lot more impact to be had to cover, say the Dade Phelons of the world as opposed to TMFs of the world. Not that they aren't the loyal opposition for a reason, but there's only so much impact they're making in this time, right? He's probably going to kill me for saying that, but it's not my problem. But
Maybe you'll kill me.
But it's hard to get those voices in if those voices aren't talking to you. And it becomes a frustrating cycle from our point of view. But I can also see where there would be some people that just would be. One thing I've noticed is that there's a lot more people that are afraid to talk to us. This is what it's a shorthand for they won't talk to us. Staffers, new, people in the lobby, state reps, freshmen, it's become a lot more a lot more silent, you know.
Well, I always, when state reps come to me, I always tell them not to talk to the media, although I tell everybody else to talk to the media because I say, if they're calling you, nobody else is going to talk to them. I mean, that's
Yeah.
why if they're calling you as a freshman, we do the orientation
Yeah,
of the new members, and they're all like, "What do we say to reporters?" I'm
yeah,
saying if they're down to calling you, then you better go talk to a chairman or something because there's a reason they're not
yeah.
talking
Right.
on this.
If it's a local outlet,
Right,
then
yeah, like
probably they've been told to talk to the delegation.
right.
If
That's true.
if
That's a
it's
good point.
if it's a national outlet, I've done those. I've done those orientations before. Those are
Right.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. It's. I wish I had a way to more clearly answer a question like that because, I when you talk to the author of a bill, you know, and you want to talk to them about some of the things that they heard in testimony or where you think it's headed,
Uh-huh.
quite a lot of them will talk to us, but then there'll be the ones that'll be like, oh, we don't talk to the XYZ paper you work for, we just don't talk to them. They're not the only ones that do that. We get a lot of that from the state agencies too, and then we get yelled at for not understanding the issue
Right,
correctly.
yeah.
It just takes a lot of trust, and I think the big bottom line there is that there's been a lot of the erosion of trust between the public officials, politicians, and the media, and to some extent the public and the media. Obviously, some of that deserved, some of that orchestrated. You know, um, I think that I think that the way someone like me gets past it is just through personal relationships. I
Mhm.
think on a one-to-one level, there's a lot more people that talk to journalists than will talk publicly to them.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So
It's
anyway,
sometimes
sorry, long-winded answer.
frustrating
Sorry.
on some of the issues that are important to TPPF that I read about every day. It's like um, school choice,
Hmm.
and you're like saying, could just somebody write about the people that are for this and why they're for it?
Yeah.
And with not some kind of crazy thing like, oh, we want to set up private schools and make money or some ridiculous thing like that. And could somebody write that half the kids in Texas are not performing at grade level? Maybe we should look at something. I mean, it's and I wanted to ask you, when you look at an issue like a new issue, I know you've done all this work on Medicaid. When you look at it, how do you decide? Because there are advocates that are going to be out there
Oh, sure.
with their positions.
Yeah.
How do you decide whose voice is not heard? You've got the people that are impacted,
Yeah.
but there's also probably people working in the system.
Yeah. Yeah. The limitations being what they are, right? You're right. You have to make those judgments because you can't get absolutely everybody into every story. You
Sure, of
can't get
course.
Corey DeAngelis into every story about ESAs.
No,
You can't get,
nor do you need to.
I mean, right. But, um, you know, so you do have to it almost comes down to a mechanics thing, right? You do have to you've got 1,800 words if you're lucky, and that's not what it used to be. It used to be 600 words, right? Back
Right,
when they
yeah.
had a finite page to fill, and now it's
Mhm.
just like
Whatever.
forever.
Yeah.
They rein me in a lot. They're like, no, you need to cut this down. Now we do it in bite-sized chunks so people can comprehend it, but you really can't. So what you have to try to do is you have to get to know the issue so well that you're researching all of the,
Mhm.
what the perspectives are. You have to
Uh-huh.
read everybody's perspective, and then you find a way to thread it, through the angle that you're getting. We usually don't do a lot of what we call thumbsuckers, right? Here's the issue. Here's everything you need to know
Right,
about it.
yeah.
Those kinds of stories, put in as many people as you can get. You know, it's a textbook, is what you end up with.
Right.
So you do have to rely on your instincts as a human to truly want to get to the truth. When you're talking about opinions, you try to find the most representative opinions, the most representative. If there are some fringe ideas, which I would define as ideas held by very few and kind of not really
Right.
adopted by the majority of the people in
Right,
that
yeah.
particular. Um, maybe you get them in there, but you don't
Maybe
want
you
to give
don't,
them
yeah.
more weight. Maybe you put them in a story about the other stuff. Maybe you allude to them, you wave at them, like we say, in the
Uh-huh.
segment. But it's a challenge every time, and certainly you and I have talked about this over the years. When are we giving equal space to both sides of the issue,
Mhm.
and are we repetitively doing the same easy, pro and con without exploring the all
Right,
the
yeah.
facets of. And I would say on the school voucher issue, we've got some really good reporters working in this state at all the news agencies, and some really curious, intelligent reporters wanting to work on it. But I think that there is a lot that could be aired out still,
Mhm.
you know. And I can appreciate that you have a perspective on it, and as TPPF has, and their research has come to a perspective on that, and I'll listen anytime you want to talk.
It's
So
great,
don't
yeah.
forget to call me.
30 years
Yeah,
they've been working on it.
yeah,
Well, let me ask you one last question about what you're doing here, and that's that I was looking the other day at something, I can't remember what it was, but some polling. I read a lot of polling. I'm very interested in what people actually think.
yeah.
And there's so much agreement on a lot of issues, and I think that those make not very interesting news stories. And I mean, really, even on the issue of support for Israel,
Of what?
even in issues like support for Israel,
Yeah,
the country's pretty much behind Israel. The country's pretty much behind the police. Nobody really is interested in bad schools.
yeah. As
You
far
know,
as issues go, yeah.
most people feel very compassionate about all those people coming across the border,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just looking pragmatic. I mean,
Yeah.
but I understand that at the end of the day, you can't file a lot of stories that, boy, ain't it a shame? That it's
Yeah.
much more interesting to write a story that goes, here are the forces of good. These Jedi
Yeah.
Knights are in there with their sabers, and they are backing down the people from the Dark Star.
Hey. Well, I mean, we deal in that though, right?
Right,
I
yeah.
mean, when everything's hunky dory and nobody's suffering and everyone's doing great, I
Well,
mean,
even
how
when
much
people are
accountability are you
suffering,
looking for at that point? Yeah.
yeah,
Or even
even
if
when
they are,
people
well,
are suffering,
yeah,
as I've said,
sure,
our test scores are not what they should be for a state
sure.
as big and as wealthy as this one.
Oh, so you're talking about agreeing on what the problems,
Yeah,
what
I
the bad
think
things are.
there is a
Yes,
lot of
there is.
agreement,
Right.
and you
Okay.
don't
Right. Right. Right.
always get that. But but for people to say, yeah, I would just have a different approach to that,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I
that's
mean,
kind of a boring story.
but you know, you're right. I mean, I hate to say it, but you know, the way you get into something like that would be to write a story about, say, this group is putting out this new idea, or an idea brewing that but that they say could solve this kind of thing. But we don't do those stories a lot.
Hmm.
There's got to be some kind of a. You remember this as a journalist, and you couldn't publish every idea that came across your letter, in your inbox, right?
Uh-huh.
And so at some point you got to establish what I want to use the term again, tipping point for what actually constitutes something that might actually happen, which tends to be kind of our bar at this point. Like we used to, for example, cover everything that came through the committees, you know, and now, if not everything, but most stuff, even
Uh-huh.
if we knew it wasn't gonna, might not go anywhere. Um, and now it's more of, well, let's write about it when they actually do something. Which, is it too late? It might be too late.
Right, yeah.
Maybe it's too late then to air out those ideas you're talking about. So I'm always open to a discussion like that, because I think that journalism, as noble and good as I believe the intentions of it are, and of the journalists that I know, you know um, there is always ways for us to be better, right?
Hmm.
um, the internet and the increasing confidence of people to put their ideas out into the universe through social media, whether they're anonymous or not, means that the ideas now are just exploding. There's so many people thinking on these same subjects,
Right.
and so how do we represent that? How do we cover that? Which seems to be kind of at the heart of your question: is how do
Hmm.
you cover anybody but the loudest voices and the easiest angles?
Uh-huh.
You got to do the work, I guess. I mean, keep talking to people like you.
Yeah. Well, and I'd like the focus on the local, because I think that that's how people are thinking. They're looking at uh, even problems that are local. I mean, how does it look in Mexico?
Yeah,
How does it look in Eagle Pass or Laredo
yeah,
or San Diego? I mean, it's kind of getting getting those perspectives.
Yeah, and if you look at kind of what the Texas Tribune has been doing, for example, I can speak to that since I've been there, is that we've opened up desks in East Texas, West Texas,
Hmm.
you know, the Panhandle, the Valley. You know, we've got people in Dallas. You know, I think our oil and gas person is in Houston, I think. So you know, so they're doing stories out of East Texas that are East Texas. You know, they're not Austin stories. You know,
Right.
we're doing stories about the Lubbock, and that's because, in part, not only do those policies, you know, those things tend to kind of be a bellwether for the rest of Texas in some cases, but also because there is an interest in local.
Mhm.
And I think you're right. We had a speaker that used to say, "All politics is local." You know who that was, right?
Yes, Tip O'Neill.
And so that's I think that there might be a dovetailing there, and maybe that's how we get Gen Z back engaged. You know,
Hmm.
they and the millennials also seem to be a very community oriented generation. You know, you can hear it in their music, you can see it in the jobs they choose, you can see it in their their team their team dynamics, and
Right.
they need their community. They're very connected, and as a generation, I'm from Generation X. We were not that. You know, um, and so and so Generation X is really who's in the management of this news organizations now, and we're it's a general rule, and so and we're seeing this these the two generations behind us, leaning into this community based thing, and so maybe the answer on how to get them engaged again is to make it about them, make it
Hmm.
about their community, and somebody figured that out before I did because that's what the trend is now,
Right.
So maybe that's it.
Well, it's very exciting that you're coming in. It's a very exciting time for Texas. I mean, we're thinking of establishing a Texas Stock Exchange. I mean, we here at TPPF have established a new Center for Energy Research, National Center for Energy Research,
Oh
because
wow, yeah.
we feel like that should be in Texas because this is where energy independence for the whole world is. So
Mhm.
you're coming in at a great time, and I am so glad you came in to talk to me
Thank you
today.
so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
And thanks to all of you for joining us today. You can subscribe to the Sherry Sylvester Show at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on X at Sylvester1630. And if you'd like to receive my 9th in Congress newsletter, which includes the weekly winners and losers, you can sign up at TPPF's website, www.texaspolicy.com/9th in Congress.